Okay. I just play probably just castle. I could already play d4 and threaten d5. Might actually be the best move. d4, queen a5, knight c3. Completely stops the idea of e5 too. It's kind of the idea. Yeah, let's go for that. d5, rook d8, takes on c6. Probably just castle. Can play c3. Rook d8 is probably going to be played. Oh, cat. Whoa. Holy smokies. That is not what I expected him to play. Uh, duh, 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 duh. I mean, it's kind of not good. It's not a great move. I'm assuming c3, e5. Say I play queen a4, take on d4, take on c6, queen c6, takes on c6. Right, so you'd have this isolated c pawn versus the isolated d pawn. Could just take and play some other move, or you could just go bishop e3. I guess we just play c3, he'll play e5, we go bishop e3. I just want to keep the pressure.
Miranda tried to staunch the tide by setting himself up as a dictator, but now the writing was on the wall. In August, Miranda snapped and bolted, but he was caught by Bolivar and other Republican soldiers trying to board a British ship with the contents of the Venezuelan treasury. An incensed Bolivar handed his erstwhile friend over to the Spaniards before fleeing into exile himself. As he sailed away from Venezuela, Bolivar left behind the ruins of a republic that had collapsed after only a year, burying his dreams just as the Great Earthquake had buried Caracas. Just as with the earthquake, if Bolivar wanted to salvage anything from this catastrophe, he was going to have to roll up his sleeves and personally start digging. It was while in exile in Cartagena, which is today in Colombia, that Bolivar did his metaphorical digging. For months he analyzed the failures of the first Venezuelan republic, determined to rescue some lessons from the rubble. The result was his El Manifiesto de Cartagena, the Cartagena Manifesto, which today reads like a cheat sheet for understanding Bolivarian thought. Bolivar decided the main thing wrong with Venezuela was its lack of a strong government, although he pinpointed the failure of Miranda to root out all Royalist forces and the creation of a federalist rather than a centralist republic. He also made vague noises about invading Venezuela and restoring independence, but nobody in Cartagena thought he'd really do it. How wrong they were. In winter of 1812, Bolivar went seriously off script. Commissioned into the New Granada army and given a small garrison, he suddenly abandoned his post and took his men on a suicidal charge up the Magdalena River, the charge being aimed at the royalist forces that still controlled most of the country. It should have been the end of Bolivar, but instead it was his making. Bolivar's blitzkrieg annihilated the Spanish loyal forces stationed along the river. Overwhelmed and terrified,
So looking at moves like knight d2,
as Bolivar came roaring through.
considering g3, because I could play bishop f4.
Wasn't even close to being done. Like a man
So still e5, I play bishop takes c6.
The invasion of Venezuela.
And I can take on
Is
e5.
known as the Admirable Campaign, but make no mistake, the admirable part certainly doesn't refer to Bolivar's conduct. Desperate to be the one to liberate Venezuela and restore the Republic, Bolivar resorted to some very dirty tricks. Chief among them was the decree.
Yeah, knight d2 makes sense. We're just trading
native Spaniards who did not actively help them liberate Venezuela.
his active piece for my
on the spot.
piece.
Whatever the legalities of Bolivar's semi-genocidal decree, it certainly worked. As a second uprising,
There's no tactics.
Venezuela's east, Bolivar rampaged
Don't
across
think.
its west,
Knight takes
liberating
f2.
city after city, just as he had done.
No,
in
knight
the
sacks
Magdalene
worked.
campaign.
Yeah.
By July,
This also
Bolivar's
unpins
forces
my
were
queen to the
collapsing
pawn.
under the onslaught. By August, resistance had simply melted away. On August the 6th, 1893, Simon Bolivar marched into Caracas and declared a new republic. Barely a year before, he had fled the city as his dreams collapsed. Now, here he was, resurrecting them from the ashes. The Admirable Campaign remains one of the greatest military victories in all of history. In about half a year, Bolivar single-handedly destroyed the royalist upper hand in Gran Colombia and freed Venezuela from Spanish rule. It's one of the main reasons his name still carries a significant weight today. Unfortunately, it also sowed the seeds of the Second Republic's destruction. Out on the plains of Venezuela, news of Bolivar's war crimes reached the bandits and the cowboys. Under the leadership of pro-Spanish psychopath Jose Tomas Boves, these disparate groups united into a force of anti-Bolivar vengeance. They were called the Legions of Hell. The ISIS of their day, the Legions of Hell glorified in the rape, mutilation, torture, and massacring of anyone who stood in their way. After Bolivar's victory, they swept across Venezuela with such ferocity, even the Liberator stood no chance. Caracas fell in an orgy of blood in July 1814, and Bolivar fled back to New Granada, only to find royalist forces
In an orgy of blood.
A successful campaign against separatists.
An orgy of blood.
Was over. By May 1815,
Sorry, that was weird.
Cartagena had turned against the hero of Magdalena, and Bolivar, he was forced to flee to Jamaica once again, watching from the ship as the Venezuelan Republic burned and his victories collapsed into dust. Most men would have given up at this point. But most men are not Simon Bolivar.
That's right. Most men are not Simon Bolivar. Take on c6, queen c6, 95. Queen will need to move.
A long cry for liberty and freedom. The letter is
We could simply play bishop e2.
Saying American natives that
Probably bishop e2 is better.
Spanish oppression, Bolivar declared a free South America would need a strong hand at the wheel, a president for life. It was the first inkling that the world had of the liberator's hidden dictatorial tendencies. But the letter would only seem ominous in hindsight. For now, Bolivar was an outcast, watching his country plunge into a vicious civil war. He needed to get back to Venezuela, and he needed to do it fast. But luckily, help was on hand from a surprising source. A decade earlier, Haiti had thrown off its French shackles and declared itself free, the only successful
because
rebellion in modern history. As a plot,
the knight.
Himself a slave, something that should have put him at odds with Haiti's new
I mean, you could have taken and played knight e5. That probably would have gave you an advantage.
In 1815, Bolivar met
But I feel like
to discuss South
his
American
pieces are very awkwardly placed, and we shouldn't be trading them.
Ships in support for freeing Venezuela, but there was a condition. Bolivar would have to swear to free all of the slaves in South America,
Yeah.
starting with his own.
h5.
It is controversial today because while Bolivar did give up his own slaves, he never forced any of his fellow
Knight
rich to follow
h4?
suit.
I mean, you probably
Regardless,
don't.
Bolivar's word was enough, and the Haitian president equips the liberator.
You don't want
For
to.
the third time in a decade, Bolivar returned to Venezuela to free it from royalist hands. But first, there would be a grinding war of attrition. For 3 years, Bolivar made as many losses as he did gains. While Haitian money kept his army afloat, the royalists were simply too strong to dislodge. In this long period, perhaps the only real victory Bolivar had was convincing Jose Antonio Paez to join him. A cowboy in the grasslands, Paez had raised
I mean, he's gonna go G5 next if you play knight H4.
It would be his men that would help ensure Bolivar's victory.
You can play H4 yourself.
Bolivar proved himself worthy of them. Before he deferred to the Liberator, Paez challenged him to a series of physical feats, culminating in a non-stop all-night ride that, to Paez's amazement, went on so long he christened Bolivar Iron Ass. In 1890,
Could also start with our idea.
Then, in spring, Iron Ass had a brainwave. With royalists
B4,
focused on defending
H4.
why not attack the viceregal capital of Bogota?
Let's
Not
say
only
just
attacked before
B5.
this, it was separated by an impassable line of mountains.
Knight goes somewhere, knight A5.
Only Bolivar, he didn't think that those mountains were as impassable as everyone seemed to think. And in May,
We play H3.
the going was beyond tough. Roaring rivers, miles of flooded plains, and torrential storms had to be braved before Bolivar's army even reached the Andes. Then the soldiers had to endure a grueling 13,000-foot climb and a march through the snow and the ice. By the time Bolivar reached New Granada, 2,000 of his men were dead. But it had been worth it. With the Spanish assuming no army would be insane enough to try and cross the Andes, the road to Bogota was wide open. The moment Bolivar descended from the mountains, it was game over. One Spanish general, a guy called Barriero, stood in his way, and Bolivar made absolute mincemeat of him. At the Battle of Boyacá, Bolivar annihilated the royalist troops in under 2 hours, suffering only 66 casualties to Barriero's nearly 2,000. Then he marched straight to Bogota. Just 4 days earlier, New Granada had been under Spanish control, and now it was in the hands of Bolivar. Bolivar's march across the Andes changed the course of history. He installed himself as
F6, so he's gonna go
G5,
G5.
Gran Colombia, and set about rebuilding his army. With momentum on Bolivar's side, there was nothing that the remaining Spanish forces could do. After an awkward 6-month ceasefire, Bolivar marched back into Venezuela. On June the 24th, 1821, the royalists were annihilated. With the revolution in Spain meaning no new troops would be coming to help the remaining royalists, they simply gave up. By August, Bolivar had done it, the thing he'd sworn to do in Rome all those years ago. After its third liberation, Venezuela would never again be under Spanish control. As adroit as Bolivar folded his homeland into
So
its new
B5,
Grand
knight
Colombian
A5,
superstate, he
C4.
must have thought his story had finally ended. Unfortunately, though, for history, it still had one final, depressing chapter. Over the next few years, the remaining provinces of Spanish South America were liberated. In 1822, Bolivar's protege, Antonio José de Sucre, liberated Ecuador. In 1824, Bolivar and Sucre together liberated Peru. Half a year later, they liberated Upper Peru, which was so grateful that it immediately renamed itself Bolivia. Ecuador was folded into Gran Colombia, while Peru named Bolivar dictator for life. The Spanish were gone, and Bolivar ruled half of South America. And it was that last part that was about to become a serious problem. If Bolivar was a great general, he was not such a great dictator. He wasted money constantly on military expeditions, and every time one of his underlings tried to press through necessary structural reforms, Bolivar would nix them, leaving the economy a heaving mess. On top of that, he kept trying to force all of the countries he'd liberated to accept being a part of Gran Colombia, when it was plainly obvious that New Granada, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru all wanted to go their separate ways. Back in Venezuela, Paez was even threatening to secede. Fearing a civil war, Bolivar abandoned Peru and rode back to Bogota, only for Peru to invade Ecuador in his absence. As Bolivar tried to hold Gran Colombia together, he began assuming more and more powers until, just like Napoleon, he too fully transitioned from enlightened despot to just plain old despot.
Yeah, maybe this is good for him.
He tried to have a new
He could play knight
constitution
C4.
written. It wound up being so liberal that Bolivar instead ignored it and held on to his powers.
I'm just gonna
1828,
continue
he was
developing.
so unpopular that he was very nearly assassinated in Bogota and had to spend hours hiding in a ditch.
So now the C pawn isn't hanging at least because I have rook C1.
His health beginning to fail. In 1829, Bolivar was forced to watch as Paez seceded from Gran Colombia, creating the state of Venezuela. As he did so, he issued a decree that Bolivar should be executed if he ever set foot in the country again. Now also cut off from his homeland, the liberator fell into a deep depression. His Caracas estates were confiscated by Paez's new government, leaving him penniless, a revolutionary ghost haunting the streets of Bogota. Finally, Bolivia accepted the inevitable and went into exile. As he trekked from Bogota to the coast, he received news that Ecuador had seceded and that his protege Sucre had been assassinated. Broken, miserable, despised, and dying from tuberculosis, Bolivar finally wound up in the house of a Spanish admirer in the coastal city of Santa Marta. Although his host sent for the best doctors in Latin America, it was useless. At the end of 1830, Bolivar boarded his final boat into the long exile of death. As he slipped away from the shores of the living, it's possible he looked back and felt familiar sadness once again. Gran Colombia lay in ashes. His dreams were ruins. Only this time, there'd be no coming back, no more chances. As Bolivar sailed away into endless night, he did so a sad and a broken man. Although Bolivar died,
Does this do anything,
he
though?
is regarded as one of the greatest men Latin America ever produced. While Venezuela is now a basket case, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru are functioning democratic states. Imperfect the liberator may have been, but there's no doubting Simon Bolivar's military genius or the strength of his vision. Few people can ever be said to have truly changed history, but Bolivar is one of them. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. It doesn't
Take.
us feel good. Let us know that you're liking this video. Also, why not use the comments to let us know what you think, or drop a suggestion down there for biographics. Why not? And subscribe if you like these biographies. We do them twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. So hit that subscribe button and the little bell thing if you actually want to hear about these videos. Because as I say every time, subscribe doesn't really do what it used to. So hit the bell. And as always, thank you for watching.
So this has the problem with his knight here is he can really only play knight a4. To which maybe I just play knight c4. And the queen is hit. Oh, but knight c4, queen c3, take. And then I play rook c1. Yeah, there's an issue there too. Yeah, I think he's still in a bit of a pickle, but we'll see. I only have 3 minutes, so. Continue applying some pressure. Let's see here. Knight c4. Can also go bishop here. Can also go c6. I guess we'll go c6. Just continue.
Check.
So check, king up. Oh, I don't have.
Check.
Oh, I think I win. Just knight c6. Takes on e2, king h1. There's no possible way to stop that. I think he needed to play bishop e4.
Check.
Yeah.
Checkmate.
GG. And this opening is pretty annoying. But it's also not good for black. It's just oh, knight c4 was just winning. Oh, of course. Yeah, it's I just miscalculated this. Knight c4 was winning because queen c3. I just take the knight. For some reason, I thought knight c4, and I was forced to take back, and then yeah, not the case. But this is still winning. c6 was well, I was running out of time, but
Check. Check. Check.
yeah. I don't know why it does this. It goes like sketchy, crazy mode. But yeah, GG.